everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about a book that has some tips and techniques for facilitating change in an educational setting. It's called The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. Now, Josh Waitzkin is the inspiration for the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, the movie with the child chess prodigy that wins a bunch of national championships. During his childhood, Josh Waitzkin won all of those championships, but he didn't really feel like this was really helping him on his search for excellence or let alone his search for happiness. Basically, this newfound fame that he had just wasn't working for him. Eventually, this led him to taking up Tai Chi with one of the Tai Chi grandmasters, William C.C. Chen, and he actually learned a lot in Tai Chi that he was able to apply to his chess game. And this is actually something that I thought was interesting when I was reading it, because just like how Josh was able to compare two different disciplines and was able to make connections between them and learn from both of them, these lessons can also be applied in a multitude of areas, including life in general and in an educational setting. And by keeping what Waitzkin discusses in mind, teachers and educators can use what he says to facilitate changes in their own classrooms and in their own lives, as well as students' lives of learning. Now, this book, The Art of Learning, is divided up into 3 sections. The first section, Waitzkin describes his interactions with his chess life and Bruce Pandolfini, a grandmaster who eventually becomes his mentor. In the second section, he talks about his participation in Tai Chi and how he was able to work with the grandmaster and as well as progress in Tai Chi and talk about the lessons that he learned from that. And in the final section, he talks about what he learned in both chess and Tai Chi and is able to make connections between the two as well as develop lessons that can be carried on over to life. And in this section, as well as the first two, there are many lessons there which I'll talk about soon that could be applied to an educational setting. One idea that I thought was particularly helpful and useful was how Bruce Pandolfini, the grandmaster who eventually became Josh's mentor, how he and Josh worked together whenever they would work on chess. Typically what would happen was Bruce would set up problems and Josh would try and figure them out, and whenever he would make a move or make a mistake, Bruce would immediately go, "Okay, Josh, why did you do that? What was your reasoning for why you put that piece there, why you made that move or that opening, and how is this going to affect you in the future?" In essence, Bruce encouraged Josh to think about every single facet of the chess game, trying to encourage him to think about his actions and not only what's happening in the present, but what's also going to happen in the future. Additionally, what would happen is Bruce would ask questions and Josh would be able to think of different ways to reach the same conclusion. And in doing so, Josh was able to develop a deeper love and understanding for the game of chess because of what Bruce was teaching him. And one of the reasons why I think this is an excellent takeaway of the book is because the way that Bruce teaches Josh is what I want to do in my future classroom and how educators should do that in their classrooms. What they want to do is they want to foster discussion and foster collaboration when working with their students, just like Bruce did with Josh. Now, as an example, I'm going to be a math teacher. This is all that geometry is. When students are given something that they're trying to prove up at the top of the paper, and they have to make the list of reasons for why a certain statement is true, they have to develop a chain of reasoning similar to what Josh had to do in his chess game. So by making this parallel between what Josh and Bruce were working on for chess, hopefully I, as an educator and any other educator watching this, will be able to carry that over to their classroom and encourage students to also develop that chain of reasoning to justify their answers. Another example is in an English class for film analysis. If students are watching, say, Macbeth, the movie version of Macbeth, the teacher could ask, okay, why was Macbeth feeling this way during this scene? And whenever a student had to answer or write something down, they would have to justify their answer other than, simply just giving the answer right then and there. Another point of the book that I thought was really interesting is something that Waitzkin calls investment in loss. And this is something that he talks about in the second section of the book. Basically, how Waitzkin describes it, investment in loss is, and this is his quote, is giving yourself to the learning process. So basically what this means is, as a student and as a learner, you are resisting your old habits and you're more willing to accept new ones, as well as you're not really afraid to make mistakes anymore. In his case, when he was doing his Tai Chi classes, he was used to a certain form in a certain way, and his body was very tense and stressed out. And the grandmaster took notice of this. So what the teacher would do is he would teach Josh very slowly, very simply, how to become more relaxed and teach him new habits when he was working on his Tai Chi form. And eventually, because Waitzkin was able to accept these new habits and resist his old ones, he was able to progress in the class much more rapidly than his classmates were. Now, from an educational standpoint, this mentality is perfect for trying to incorporate change into a classroom because, at least in my own educational experience, there are a good number of teachers that I've had in the past where in their classroom it seems not right to make mistakes. Like, making mistakes was discouraged. And something that teachers and educators need to do is to be able to set up that environment at the beginning of the year that making mistakes is okay. And sometimes you're going to have to learn a different way that you're not used to. Again, continuing with the geometry example like I just talked about. Geometry is a very different learning process from algebra, where algebra is very computational and plugging in numbers into a formula. Geometry is having that chain of reasoning again, thinking step by step. Okay, how do I get from one step to the next? And there may be more than one way to do this, whereas in algebra there's typically one or two ways to do it. So incorporating that type of environment where it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to not let your ego get in the way when you're answering questions, it's okay to learn something new in an entirely new method, that's okay. So making this parallel between Waitzkin's experience in Tai Chi and how he wasn't afraid to make mistakes when working with his teacher, if our teachers and educators can do that with their students, these students are going to hopefully make much more rapid progress than they would had they not adopted investment in loss and being not afraid to make mistakes and give themselves to the learning process. A final takeaway that I thought was really, really interesting in this book actually occurs in the very last section, where Josh Waitzkin talks about building your trigger. And in this particular chapter of that section, the focus of that chapter is simply being able to focus. He brings this up because he talks about the high-stakes competitions that he would be involved in when he was doing chess and Tai Chi, or specifically the push hands discipline of the martial art. And he said it was incredibly important to be able to keep cool under pressure. And he said that when thinking about those types of situations, it's important to not think so much on the event that's going to happen, where for him it'd be a chess tournament or a Tai Chi competition, or in a student's case in an educational setting, an important test. If the competitor or the student is all that they're thinking about is that high-stakes opportunity, then the stress and the tension and the overexcitement will most likely affect the performance pretty negatively. So in order to counter these feelings, what Waitzkin suggests is to keep a healthy day-to-day schedule so that when that high-stakes opportunity rolls around, it feels normal. So when Josh was doing his competitions, he would make sure that his forms were down, forms were complete, everything was smooth, so that when the competition was there, everything felt normal, and he wasn't nervous, wasn't scared at all. Now, in an educational setting, teachers can do this exact same thing. And actually, one of my teachers in high school did do this. What he did was, I was in an AP calculus class, and what he did was, for all of our tests, in order to prepare us for the AP test in May, was he created the tests, but all of his questions were questions pulled directly from old AP tests. So anytime that we were tested or given some kind of assessment, we were automatically put into the environment of AP-style questions, so that when the actual test rolled around, we weren't caught off guard by anything. We knew what to expect, we knew how the questions were going to be worded, and we had a feeling of how to answer the questions, process of elimination, different methods on solving problems, and things like that. So as a result, we weren't really distracted by nerves, and we were able to focus on the task at hand. And similarly, with Josh Waitzkin, he was able to do that with chess and Tai Chi as well. So by taking this mentality of building our trigger and finding those ways to make those high-stress situations seem normal and not so terrible, for lack of a better word, this could definitely help out students if educators are able to implement this into their classrooms. I think as a whole, I really, really enjoyed how this book was written because even though it was divided up into the three sections where one was talking about mainly chess, one was talking about Tai Chi, and the other one was talking about both of them combined, I really liked how it was written because within each of those sections, it was obviously divided up into chapters, but each chapter kind of stood on its own. You didn't need to read each chapter successfully in order to understand the next one, so I didn't need to read chapter 1 in order to understand chapter 2, and didn't need that to understand chapter 3, and so on. It seemed as though, even though the whole theme of the book was, I'm Josh Waitzkin, I am the best at the art of learning, I know how to be a learner, here I'm going to help you. Even though that was the main theme, it was like each chapter had its own separate theme. So each of those 3 takeaways that I explained earlier, each of those was basically the theme of a certain chapter. And I think that this is what makes this book an excellent tool and an excellent resource for educators, because if they don't necessarily agree with 1 or 2 chapters, they don't have to even think about those. There's a whole bunch of other material in the other 2 or 3 sections that they could apply to their classroom. So I think that that's really, really nice, because they can just pick it up, look at one of the chapters, and each chapter is relatively short, and each one has an abundance of information that they can use to implement and facilitate change in their classroom. So even though this book wasn't technically written by an educator per se, it still has an incredible amount of information that educators and teachers can use to facilitate change, not only in their classroom for their students, but things that they can also apply to their own lives. One of the best quotes in this book is actually the very last line of the book in the afterword, and it says, "Mastery involves discovering the most resonant information and integrating it so deeply and fully, it disappears and allows us to fly free." Now that's the very last line of the book, and Waitzkin doesn't give any explanation as to what that means, but after thinking about it a little bit, what it means to me is, as an educator and as a teacher, if I can get my students to become better learners by incorporating what I read about in this book, if I can get them to become better learners and get them to want to learn as opposed to thinking that they have to learn, once they know how to learn, they can go learn whatever they want without my help. Now they can go learn with peers, with friends, with parents, whoever, but once they learn how to learn in sort of a meta definition, there's no stopping them, which is absolutely fantastic, because if we get them to learn what they want to learn, who knows what they'll be capable of achieving, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think as teachers and educators, by taking what Waitzkin has to say and incorporating that into our classrooms and keeping it in mind, I really feel that students will not only be encouraged to think about their own thinking, think about their learning process, think about their reasoning, but also just how to become better learners and students. I think that this is an absolutely great read. It's definitely a fantastic resource and guide for facilitating change in a classroom for an educator and a teacher. Right, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned a little bit about The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. If this sounds something interesting to you, or you just want to learn a little bit more, stop by Amazon, look up The Art of Learning, and it should be right there. Once you put that in the search bar, it should be one of the very first entries. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.